Cheat on your wife with mine. I will burn your life to the ground. Way back in the early 2000s, I began to suspect that my wife was up to something. Our 2 kids were about 4 and 6, still young, but not so young they couldn't use something about what had happened in their day. They started talking a lot about staying with my wife's parents during the day, which wasn't really that strange in and of itself, but since they lived about 90 minutes away, doing so 2 or 3 times a week seemed a bit much. That was basically every day. When I asked her about it, she denied it, but was never a good liar. So I started tracking the mileage on her car, and sure enough, I knew some shit was going on. Then one day, I sat down at the computer, and she had left a sticky note with her American Online password written on it next to the keyboard. I could not resist and logged in to read her emails, and saw a few email exchanges between her and her college BFF where they discussed how my wife was regularly fucking one of her exes from high school. No mention of details about him other than my wife also talking shit about his wife, making fun of how she'd gotten fat after having kids. Anyway, I printed out these email exchanges and stashed them. I still needed to know the details, so I called a friend who was a cop, and he suggested I call a guy he knew that had left the force to become a PI. Ron was great. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails and what little I knew about my wife's activities, and he figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos and times data locations all about how she would take the kids to her parents, then they'll meet this guy for lunch, then they'd go to a dumpy motel for a few hours, after which she'd pick up the kids and return home. At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents cheated on each other, and the fallout absolutely fucked mine and my siblings' childhood. It was something that was totally unacceptable. I also asked Ron to find out what he could about this guy. Ron absolutely came through. I learned his name Bob, that he was married and had 3 kids. I also found out that he worked as a VP of sales for his father-in-law's business. At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Ron for a couple more copies of his report, and one more thing I wanted him to do for me. On the same day I had my wife served with the divorce papers at her work, I had Ron meet with this guy's wife and show her everything he'd found out. She seemed nice, and I figured that she deserved to know what her dear hubby was up to. What she did with that information was up to her. While the information about my wife's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, Bob's wife did a real number on him. According to the publicly available court documents from the divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her dad found out what he'd done, Bob was fired, and since her parents actually owned the house where Bob and his wife lived, he also got evicted. Their divorce was ugly, lots of fighting in and evidently out of court. I guess Bob went to the house and started arguing with his wife. There were restraining orders, a few more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, jail time, and so on. I can't find Bob on the internet anywhere these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state, and his ex-wife did okay. As for me, my ex and I got along well enough. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all anymore. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kids' mom and is important to them, nothing beyond that. It's been several years since that chapter in my life closed. It was a messy time, and I wasn't sure how I would recover from everything, but I did. You adapt, you learn to forgive, and you move forward. The weight of betrayal gets easier to carry, and you realize that the world doesn't stop turning because of your pain. The kids, now young adults, are thriving. I never let them see the full extent of the mess while they were growing up, at least not the ugly parts. I made sure to shield them from the drama, but as they grew older, I had to answer their questions, and I did as honestly as I could. They understood maybe even more than I gave them credit for at the time. My son, now 23, works in tech, and my daughter, 21, is studying to become a nurse. They both inherited their mother's intelligence, and their sense of humor is definitely mine. We stay in touch regularly, and I try my best to be a present father. As they entered adulthood, I started realizing that my focus needed to be on being the best father I could be, not holding on to the past. As for my ex-wife, in the years following our divorce, I saw glimpses of her life through mutual acquaintances. She never remarried, but she found someone new a couple of years after we split. Her relationship with him seemed to be pretty stable, no cheating scandals, no drama. I've heard that she's been mostly focused on her career, and in a way I think that's been her redemption. Not that I'm looking for her redemption, but it seems like she's at least found some peace after everything. It was hard though seeing her move on, because it made me reflect on how much of my own life had been spent recovering from the pain she caused. It wasn't easy at first, but I eventually found my own footing. I started focusing more on myself, trying new things, even traveling a little. I joined a few community groups and even started a hobby in woodworking. It wasn't about running from the past, it was more about rebuilding a life that had been shaken to its core. But it wasn't just about my ex-wife, it was about Bob too. The guy who, in many ways, was the catalyst for the entire mess. I heard rumors here and there about his life. After everything went down with his divorce, he seemingly disappeared. The last I heard, he had left the state and was living under an assumed name, trying to rebuild his life. There were whispers about his financial situation being a wreck, and I wouldn't be surprised. When your wife cleans out the joint accounts and your business relationships crumble because of your actions, it's hard to get back up. I always wondered if Bob ever reflected on what happened. Did he ever think about how everything fell apart for him after I took the time to expose him to his wife? I know it wasn't about revenge for me, it was about justice. I wanted his wife to have the truth, and she deserved to know what was going on in her marriage. But I never thought much about how it affected him in the long run. Not that I cared anymore. What I did to Bob wasn't about hurting him, it was about stopping the lie. I had to find closure too, and I did slowly in the months after the divorce. I realized that revenge didn't matter as much as moving on, but I couldn't help but wonder what his life was like now. He'd been so comfortable in his role as a VP of sales, living off the cushy lifestyle provided by his father-in-law's company. How would he fare now, with nothing but his own name to his credit? I never learned the full details of what happened to him after the divorce. There were no further police reports or public records. But one day, years later, a strange thing happened. I was at a family gathering, just my kids, and I ran into someone who knew Bob. A distant relative of his, actually, someone I had never met. This person told me that Bob had fallen off the map, that he was living a quiet life in some small town, working odd jobs and trying to stay out of trouble. His wife, meanwhile, was doing well. She had found stability, gotten a good job at her father's business, and was reportedly happy. It felt like a strange kind of justice. Bob had been living a life of privilege, and now he was living in the shadows of his past actions. His wife had come out the other side scarred but strong, and had built something for herself. Maybe that's the real lesson here. People can fall, but they can also rise, often without the world ever knowing the full story. And me? Well, I've done my best to keep my peace. I haven't remarried. It's not that I haven't had the opportunity, I just don't feel the need. My life is full enough with my kids and my work. I've done the hard things, and now I'm just living. I never really understood what people meant by finding yourself until I finally started living for me. It wasn't about finding a new partner or reinventing myself, it was about simply healing and letting go. Sometimes I catch myself. It was a tumultuous time, but I've come to realize that it was a necessary one. It forced me to see who I was, who I wanted to be, and what I was capable of. Now I'm in a good place. Not perfect, but good. I don't wish ill on my ex-wife or Bob. They have their own journey now, one that doesn't involve me. In a way, it's freeing to let go. Life moves forward, and the past fades into something you no longer carry with you. For now, I look at my kids. They're bright futures ahead, and I know that I gave them everything I could. I've learned that you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. And if there is one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that I can take the hits, recover, and keep moving forward.